Hi, this is Joe Bouchard, former member of the Blue Oyster Cult, and you're listening to Talking Blues.
I wanted to start with an album or your involvement with an album that I haven't seen you talk about much, which is the Pink Floyd Reimagined or Animals.
Oh yeah,
Reimagined.
I love that.
Oh my God, it's one of
that.
my favorite Pink Floyd albums. And
I am still stunned that I got the opportunity to do that recording.
Tell me about how it came about.
I just got an email, and would you like to be on a Pink Floyd tribute album? And I said, sure, and it was from Cleopatra Records. They do a lot of these kind of recordings. So next thing you know, I get some tracks. Some was a link to the basic track, and they said just put a bass part on it. And then, of course, I looked into it, and it was a little more complicated than I thought because actually there's two bass parts. The original recording has actually two bass parts, a lower part, then there's a melody part too. It comes in at the end, so it was a little complicated. I thought maybe that's something I could have knocked off in a day, but it took about 3 days, to get everything just the way I like it. And but the most amazing thing were the other musicians that I was going to be playing with, and uh, Billy Cobham, for example, as the drummer.
Mhm.
I've known Billy since 1972. I actually go to parties and I play with his brother Wayne Cobham. He's a tremendous trumpet player, and we've jammed at different events. Um, and so I know Billy, and we toured with Mahavishnu Orchestra back in 1972,
Wow.
and yeah, that long, and what a tremendous musician. So I was amazed that I was then I found out that Al Di Meola was going to be the guitar player. How good is that? I love Al. Al is my hero. And what's his name?
Patrick
Yeah,
Moraz.
Patrick Moraz from Yes, and it was supposed to be a different singer, but in the end, I think they got a great singer, James Labrie from
Dream Theater.
Dream Theater. Oh, you've studied it more than I have, but and then I started spreading it out, and it's just it's really popular. It's one the biggest streaming thing that I've been on in recent years, and
It's interesting because tribute albums can sometimes not sound great, but
yeah,
especially that tune is so respectful to the original.
yeah.
And
But what I like about it is that Al does not try to sound like Gilmore.
no,
He is Al. I mean, he's got that picking style that's so unique, and so he did a great solo, and the keyboard solo is amazing, and yeah, yeah. I mean, it was all good, and I think it was mixed by some German guy. This is a very international production.
hmm
Um, I'm in Connecticut. Uh, Al D is in New Jersey, but Billy Cobham was in Switzerland. He got stuck over there during the COVID.
wow,
Yeah, he couldn't get back,
wow.
so he was living in Switzerland and did the drum part in Switzerland. And I'm not sure where the other parts were recorded, but it was a real pandemic project, where I had to guess in my mind because I was the first guy to put his part down. And I said, I really gotta, make this, solid for everybody to follow. So that's kind of how that happened, and I am really grateful. And I'm going to do another project with Billy Sherwood, who's the current bass player in Yes.
Hmm.
We're working on another project. It's not Pink Floyd. It's a progressive rock
Oh,
thing where
neat.
I play the bass. I'm playing the bass for the bass player in Yes. It's like a dream, Just what can I say? Occasionally I get asked to do these sort of outside projects. Mostly I'm working on my own material and new stuff, and um, but occasionally these things pop up, and I am just like stunned, and thankful that somehow they got my name. They pulled it out of a hat. I don't know.
Well, if people haven't heard it, it's called Animals
Yeah.
Reimagined, and it's a great
Yes.
album.
Great album, really is.
I know that you have this extensive musical background. I think influenced possibly
Hmm.
by your uncle, maybe your dad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you obviously come from a musical family with your brother,
Yeah.
but you play a lot of instruments. So I don't know which came first, the piano, the guitar, bass, or trumpet.
I was piano first.
Okay.
We had an upright piano on our farm. We had a dedicated music room, which was great. It was a real small farmhouse that I grew up in upstate New York, and but we had a dedicated music room, and we, I I took lessons when I was 9 years old on piano, and didn't like them. I'd rather be playing baseball, that kind of thing. But I got back into the piano because we had a lot of guitar players, friends of mine that were guitar players. So if there was a piano, I would be playing piano parts. And then finally, when I was thinking about what I was going to do for a living, I said, well, I'm going to be a musician. It'll be easy. It's what I love to
Did
do.
that happen, or did you think about that because of your uncle who was a? Did he not play jazz?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But he was like, he had a little insurance business, and he was just a weekend guy.
Okay.
But I ended up being full time for many years, and that's how I made a living. And I'm thinking, mostly I played the bass in Blue Oyster Cult, and yeah, but I loved every minute of it. It's amazing.
Well, before Blue Oyster Cult, you went to school for
Yeah,
music, for
yeah,
piano
yeah,
and composition.
yeah. Well, I would have been a guitar major, except in 1966, guitar was not a serious instrument. If you wanted to go to college, you had to study a serious instrument. And yeah, my trumpet chops were terrible. I went to my singing teacher and I said, "Yeah, I want to go to college, study music. Do you think I could be a singing major?" And the singing teacher said, "Well, why don't you go talk to your piano teacher?" And my piano teacher was this nun, Sister George, at the parochial school, the Catholic school. I went to Sister George, and she was about 80, and she said, "Oh, you can do anything you want to do." And I said, "Okay." And then I found out how hard it was. I had to really bust my chops. The last 2 years of high school, I got back into piano and really was intense about it. And started learning some of the classical music. But I still was one. By the time I got to Ithaca College, which is a beautiful music school um, in New York State, beautiful town,
Hmm.
right there by Cornell. Um, but I was way behind most of all of my students. I was the worst piano player there, but they didn't care. I always did. I would, I'd play some jazz. I played swing music. I played funk music. I joined a Latin jazz band that was really cool, and with two girl singers
But
and
that was on the bass, right?
percussionists. Yeah, that was my first time on the bass.
So you learned the bass in a Latin jazz
I
band?
learned it. Yeah, playing Latin music.
Wow.
We had charts. We had charts for everything, and the leader of the band was actually my guitar teacher. They finally, by the time I've been at school for a couple of years, they finally realized that they had to have a guitar teacher, And eventually, my friend Steve Brown, um, he had like 7 guitar teachers, in the '90s, in the '80s and '90s. They had added a lot of guitar teachers to the staff at Ithaca. And now there's lots of schools that will take you as a guitar major, but I had to learn that, yeah, and I just like fiddling around with other music. I play the banjo and mandolin, and get to use those occasionally.
I see a collection of a lot of
Yes,
instruments
a few
behind you.
guitars back there. Yeah, and I love it. I love all of it. It's just, and then I got back into the brass. Because I was so bad as a trumpet player that, when, time opened up, after I retired from, I had a teaching business for many years, doing a little teaching on the side, which was great. It was independent teaching, so I could go out and do gigs and whatever I had to do, and just tell my students, "I'll see you in a couple of weeks." Just practice this.
What were you teaching? Which instrument? Because you play so many.
Mostly guitar.
Okay.
I mean, occasionally a banjo lesson or mandolin lesson, or I did songwriting lessons for a while. I wrote some books. I was working with a publishing company called Alfred Publishing. It's a big music publisher, and I wrote about 5 books for them.
Wow.
Rock piano, all my stuff that I do: rock guitar, rock piano, rock bass, no brainer bass. And they would put the same title out, but they would change it. You don't have to read to learn how to play the bass.
So if we go back and you said you decided that you wanted
Mhm.
to pursue music as a career or become a
Mhm.
musician, tell me what you had in mind. Like, what did you picture that to be?
Rock stardom. I, I well, say before I even played the piano, way back as a young toddler, I heard a Little Richard record, and I said, "Holy mackerel! This is amazing!" I'd go to my cousin's house, and he had older sisters, so they had Elvis records, and they had all the rock and roll records of the day. But I was amazed. I heard Little Richard's greatest hits. I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" It wasn't swing music, or the Dorsey Brothers, or Frank Sinatra. It was Little Richard. So that sort of got me thinking that I should really be in this rock music business. And luckily, I think it developed. As I graduated from Ithaca in 1970, and within 1 year, we signed a contract with Columbia Records.
But when you went to
Just
Ithaca, what were you thinking? I mean, did you want to maybe pursue teaching? Was it mainly about learning how
Yeah,
to play the
I
instrument?
was. Yeah, of course, it was like something to fall back on, and I was a music education major. I don't think they had too many performance majors. They had music therapy, that kind of thing was offered. Um, Music theory. Eventually, I got my master's degree in music composition. I went back in the '90s. I went back to graduate school. It took me about 6, 7 years to get my graduate degree, but that was in music composition, and that was a real eye opener because I'd always been a songwriter all this time. Write some songs. A new album was coming up. I'd have to finish an album, and there'd be maybe one slot left for me to put my song on the album. But after years after that, when I was back in graduate school, I could just write music that didn't have to be a song. It just could be like a string quartet or a brass quintet. And I eventually, my master's thesis was a ballet piece,
Uh-huh.
45 minutes long, for a 90-piece orchestra.
Wow.
I was out of my mind.
Okay, so why a
I was,
ballet
I
piece?
thought I was Stravinsky. I thought I could be Stravinsky. The thing is about musicians, they're always dreamers. And I certainly fall into that category.
Well, but at
Uh,
the same time, if you had a dream of becoming a rock star, then you achieved that dream, right? Which not many people
yes,
can
yes.
say.
I'm card carrying rock star.
Okay, so I want to go into that a little bit, but before we do you think of yourself as a piano player, guitar player, bass player? Like what?
Well, as a songwriter, I do most of my writing on piano. I'm thinking about that recently, um, because it has all the notes there, you know, uh, and then what I'll do is I might start a song on the guitar, but then I always go to piano. Or if I start on piano, I'll go and verify what I'm doing on a guitar, and then sort of put the two together. So I hope that they're not all of one or all of the other. It's kind of a total thing. That it comes together after I get all have explored all the regions and of the sonic palette.
But
I
I,
don't want to get too
no, no,
technical.
but
That's
I'm
not the way
curious
I
as
do
to
it.
how you hear things. Like, do you hear it as a guitar player, piano player, or does it not matter? Do you know what I mean? When you think of a
I don't think
song,
it matters. I don't think it matters. I'm doing a lot of sort of dream writing now. Where whatever I dream, I will pursue that the next day. That's certainly what I did on my latest album. I get stuck and like, how can I make this interesting? And I said, well, just go to bed and sleep a bit, and hopefully just before you wake up in that sort of moment as you're waking up, that's when the best ideas come. For me, and
more so than driving down the highway and just humming along.
that helps. That helps too. It's someday, yeah. Or I'd be driving in the car, and you'll see me pulled over to the side of the road, and I'm humming into my phone. So if you see me parked along the side of the road, I'm probably working on a riff for a song.
Has this always been the case in your life?
No, in the very early days of the band, when we had signed with Columbia, um, I just kind of like would have these things where I just go blurt it all out at once, and hopefully, have a notepad and write things down or put it on a cassette. You get a boom box with the old cassettes. You put it on the cassette, and then you work out the cassette to be a little bit more fleshed out arrangement. And then I would bring it into the band, but I don't really think I thought about how those ideas came about. They just came about. I, you know.
And then many years later, when you were actually studying composition, did it all make sense? Like, did what you did in the past, were you following the right path to becoming a good composer?
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to become a good composer. It's an ongoing struggle. Uh, I'm trying to. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it started as an extension of the songwriting, and then I said, wait a minute. I'm doing this thing that's this purely instrumental, and I was sort of writing in a sort of the modern style of the day. Sometimes it was atonal music or modal, choosing a different mode and sticking with that. I think my composition teacher liked the fact that I would be sort of real academic at the beginning of a piece, and then I'd get about three quarters of the way through, and then I'd start rocking out.
So when you played with the Latin jazz band, I think it was called Que Pasa. When
Oh
you
boy, you've done your
when
homework.
when you
That's a good one.
so when you played in that band, that wasn't what you were going after. That wasn't the big rock stardom. But what did you learn from that experience of playing in a Latin jazz band?
Ooh, that was good. Well, it was the most professional band I had been in, and everybody was an ace ace musicians. They were all older than me, so I was the kid. That they got to fill in as the bass player, and I was there for 2 years. So um, no, just the whole way it was organized, and was all the parts were really good, and then I got pretty good at reading music, so I could get a new song and sight read it during a gig, which was I well, being a piano major, when you're reading music on piano, you've got right hand, left hand, all kinds of things, different rhythms going in different directions. The bass part, it's just one note at a time, pretty much.
Right.
Pretty much. So that was really a piece of cake compared to some of my stuff that I had to do for my classical piano. Um, no, I learned a lot. I was playing the parts that were probably played by studio musicians, the people who made Sergio Mendes band in 1966,
Right.
Brazil '66, whatever it was, and uh, and then I found out that most of those recordings were people from the Wrecking Crew. So I was playing the bass lines of the Wrecking Crew. So that was a good foundation that I would take with me later.
But I presume joining Blue Oyster Cult, which wasn't they
Hmm.
weren't called that at that point, but you when you got
Yeah.
the call from your brother to say come and join the band, I guess that's a completely different discipline.
Yes. And I said, I better forget all of my school learning and just play everything what you think it would be, just play it backwards. The guys, they had a style before I came into the situation, and and they were really street musicians, not really not they knew a little bit about musical, the traditional music forms, but mostly they were like you know street musicians basically, or learn by ear, and they were also into a lot of the sort of bizarre stuff at the time, like Captain Beefheart, or bands like there was a band called Auto Salvage, and but they were into the English bands. Traffic,
Right.
was about that time, and uh, so I said that I should definitely sort of uh, adjust my style to fit into the situation, and give them a good foundation, and hopefully it worked, and people are still talking about the music. A good 50 years later.
It's interesting that you get a phone call saying, I want you to join the band as a bass player, and we're going on tour with Led Zeppelin. And then soon
Yes.
after, the the Zeppelin tour doesn't happen and you get dropped by the record company. So how
Yes.
did you feel then?
I was mad. I said they didn't give me a chance. I had followed the career of the guys. They were called Soft White Underbelly, and then they had another transitional name. And I had followed them for all my college career. I was expected, and I loved the stuff that they were doing. It was kind of more West Coast jam band type music, but I really loved it, and I expected that they would become big rock stars. And I didn't never thought I'd join the group. I didn't. No, I don't think I ever really thought I have to join the group.
Mhm.
But if they could do it, why I could get a band together and do it. I you know especially our guitar player Donald Roser, and now he's also known as Buck Dharma. He's a very gifted uh, musician, very gifted. His father was a jazz musician,
Mhm.
very good jazz musician. So he grew up in that atmosphere. He's brilliant.
But but within a year, you're auditioning for Clive Davis and you get a record deal,
Yes,
which is pretty amazing.
yeah.
Do you remember that audition? I guess you would.
Oh yeah, sure.
And did you think you had it?
No, I mean, I don't think we were that good. It was sort of, I think we were just in the right place at the right time. Columbia was expanding their sort of heavier options, the rock options, because they had Paul Simon, they had Bob Dylan, but they didn't have, and they had the Birds, but they didn't really have anybody to compete with Led Zeppelin. we, I could do that. I could do that. But it was more than that. But it was like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, and what our manager was very astute in that he felt like we should just get rid of all of that sort of '60s jam band West Coast style and do the more, maybe the British harder edge style, and that was fine by me. I had no problems with that. I like doing all kinds of music, so that was fun.
I mean, I think the band's been described as the thinking man's heavy metal band. How did you imagine? How did you picture that, or how did the band picture
Yeah,
themselves?
our manager thought up that. He was brilliant. Yeah, because the lyrics had a weird bent to them. Maybe in the sort of Pink Floyd thing. There was the earliest. That was definitely we felt like, yeah, the early Pink Floyd. The lyrics were really whacked out, and so we didn't mind that at all. We didn't feel like we didn't have to do a commercial, Moon June, love tune type lyric. Well, we were wanted to be weird. We want to be different from the average in those days, and we held that up with pride.
I'm just going to go back to a question I meant to ask you. As you were growing up, you lived close to the St. Lawrence River,
Hmm.
close to Watertown, I presume.
Yeah.
I'm from Toronto, Canada, so
Oh
I
yeah.
can kind of picture all that. I think Canadian radio had some impact on you and your brother.
Yes.
Tell me
Yeah.
how did the Canadian radio influence the musician that you are today?
CKWS in Kingston.
Right,
We used to listen to Kingston radio, which was interesting because there was the Canadian content law, and
right.
so there was some lot of different Canadian bands. I heard the Beatles way before they were on American radio.
Yeah, that's
They,
right.
I remember when the Beatles came out, and I was listening to it on the Kingston stations, and I said, I don't know, it's kind of rough around the edges. I don't know if this thing is going to catch on. You know, um, yeah, we were definitely influenced by that. Cliff Richard and the Shadows was the other English band that the Canadian stations would play a lot, and
Right.
American stations really never got on to Cliff Richards until the '80s, I think.
Interesting.
Um, and that was a big influence on the Beatles. Paul McCartney could do a tremendous version of Cliff Richard's voice, but then they were not the Beatles, and then the Beatles came out in America, and it was all over. It was like all over, but the shouting. You guys, I mean, I remember saying to my brother, because we had played our Beach Boys songs and instrumentals, the Ventures, and all, mostly a lot because we didn't really have a lot of confidence in our voices. Um, and then the Beatles came out. I said, Albert, what are we going to do? Well, I'm not sure. The next thing you know, we're playing the high school dances, and like the whole night was Beatles songs. And we had to learn to sing. We had to learn to, woo! We had to do all of that. So much fun. So much fun.
So very quickly, the band gets the record deal, and then you guys. I mean, from where I sit, I never know how things move, but the band did quite well from the first album, did it not?
Pretty well.
Did it surprise you?
It made a profit because we didn't spend much money on it. I think it was $10,000 for the whole thing.
Wow.
We just delivered the tapes and the artwork. Everything was like all in for 10 grand. And then they sold about 7,000 records, so they probably made a profit of maybe $5,000 at the end, you know. Uh, and but I think they were mostly impressed that we toured our butts off. We were out playing with all kinds of groups, Savoy Brown, Bob Seger, the young Aerosmith, Uriah Heep. It was the endless tour.
So, how do you look back on those days now? Because I presume you were probably doing hundreds and hundreds of days a year, probably spending very little time at home, spending a lot of time
Right.
in motels and
About
hotels.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
I was I had a great time. It didn't, it was the realization of my dream. So yeah, I felt pretty comfortable with it. I mean, we'd have our ups and downs, and sometimes the tours wouldn't be the best, and you wish you were home. But most of the time, I was just thrilled to be in front of an audience. Um, you go into a small town, and you would be the biggest event in that town for the month, or maybe even the year. Blue Oyster Cult was here.
Mhm.
And we slowly picked up fans, and the record label realized that we were building our fans on the road. The biggest tour that really made an impression, we got to be the opening act for Rod Stewart and the Faces
Wow.
in 1975. And this was sort of the setup for our big hit album and our big hit song. Um, we played all over the country. It was a classy show. They had an all white stage, white instruments, white things, and then in the middle of the show, the curtain would come up and there'd be a full orchestra there, and Rod would sing his ballads. So it was the first time we played to full houses everywhere, and and also it was the first time we had a primarily female audience. Mostly before that, it was all guys in leather jackets and jeans,
Right.
But Rod brought the ladies in, and then the year after that, we came up with our big hit, "Don't Fear the Reaper," and everything changed.
Did you know when that song was being recorded that it was something special?
I knew it was something special from the first time I heard it. Donald brought his cassette into rehearsal, and he had worked on it for, I don't know, maybe a month at home. We were that rare time that we were off the road, and brought it into rehearsal, and all the parts were there. It was like, yeah, and the trick is, how do you find a hit song for a weird group?
Is that the way you saw the band?
Yeah, yeah. We wanted to have a hit song, but we didn't want to cheapen it by just doing, you know, a typical pop song, that has the right hooks in it. I don't know. There's something magical about that song, and I still play it, like, I play acoustic guitar version of it. It seems like I learned something new about it. There's just so many levels,
Hmm.
and Donald's lyric is kind of, evolving, always evolving, and how I feel about it, and people go crazy. So that's a beautiful thing.
It's interesting. I think was it one of the Scream movies that there was an acoustic version of that song,
Yeah,
which was really done well.
yeah,
And then there's also the more cowbell.
yes.
So the song seems to have this life that continues.
Yeah, continues. It has life that continues. I don't know. Maybe it's because we were that weird group that you wouldn't expect, and that's why the cowbell thing. It caught everybody by surprise. Like, what the hell is that? And but it opened us up to a whole generation that grew up on other music, hip hop and grunge and disco and whatever, and may have missed, our hardcore days, the early days. It's hard to put a, you know, how do you connect to a new generation? Well, that's one way is you get on a comedy show and make people laugh.
I can't remember what year I saw you at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, but I remember seeing
Oh,
you,
yeah.
and you had
Oh,
your
I remember.
laser show.
Yeah. Oh, tremendous.
Yeah.
That was a good year. A really good year. And Maple Leaf Gardens, oh my God. I can't believe we're here. I remember the first time we played in Toronto was with Mott the Hoople.
Great band.
And what's the name of that hall? The something
Massey Hall?
Massey Hall. It was Massey Hall. And the opening act was a band we never heard of, Aerosmith. It was one of their first gigs.
Wow.
They weren't that good. They got a lot better. They got a lot better, and they were good friends of ours. But that was the first time we were in the middle, and Mata Hoople closed. So they had all the young dudes,
So
and that was the first time in Toronto. But I remember that well, and I remember Maple Leaf Gardens. Wow, what are we doing here?
that's crazy when you think about the number of shows that you've played, and that you can remember that from that many years ago.
It was a tough thing to get the right agent. I remember that there were competing agents in those days, and I remember we had to fire one because another one was going to give us a better deal. Then we ended up having to pay a commission to the first one. It's amazing we survived. But we did, and yeah, it was an interesting time.
Do you remember a moment where you thought, "Wow, we've made it. This is that dream of me wanting to be a rock star." And was there a moment where you thought, "Oh, I think I am one," or "I'm in a band that's huge"?
Well, probably playing Madison Square Garden. Even though we were opening for Rod, there was like David Bowie was backstage, Bruce Springsteen, Andy Warhol. We had a big party. The record label really, really supported us. It was a big step to play Madison Square Garden, and we ended up playing there 3 times. But there were other great places, a lot of stadium shows.
Mm-hmm.
I think back fondly now at Winterland in San Francisco.
Right.
We played there 4 or 5 times. Man, it was great. And that place, Jimi Hendrix played there, and Grateful Dead, and it was the place in San Francisco at Winterland, and you could see the kids lining up. We'd be at the hotel at the top of the hill, and you can look out your window and you see the lines going around the block. I'm like, wow, that's cool.
That is cool. So not only do you have a hit that still is huge today, but the band also had another hit with "Burning for You."
Yes,
which is also a magnificent song.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't. Well, I wrote a version of that because the lyric was by a guy who wrote lyrics for us. Richard Meltzer wrote the lyric, and it was just sitting on the piano in our rehearsal room for months. And I'm picking through this stuff, like what should, there's lyrics to this and that. And I said, "Oh, I'm burning for you." Actually, it was called "Burn Out the Night," had a different title. And Donald changed it to "Burning for You." A good choice there. Good choice. But "Burn Out the Night," I thought could have been a hit too, because I just liked the way what it was talking about, I think that Richard had broken up with his girlfriend, and it was kind of that kind of breakup song, but it was poetic. It was poetic. Anyway, I wrote a version of it. It was terrible. It was ended up in the scrap heap, and Donald wrote his version of it, and there's a couple competing stories about he brought it in, and my brother said it wasn't that good, and take it, don't do that over again. So he came back with a new version, which is the version pretty much what you hear.
It's an interesting thing because your band,
Yeah.
and it has this heavy metal image to it or hard rock image to it. But when you look
Hmm.
at both the Reaper and Burning for You, they're not really heavy songs. They're very melodic and very
Yeah.
catchy. And
Melodic. Yeah. And Donald's voice definitely delivers the message pretty well in both songs. Yeah. I don't know. That's we you know we worked hard on a lot of other singles that didn't connect as much as that, but at this point, we're grateful for those, and we're grateful for all the other stuff that maybe could have been, but wasn't. It's a real tightrope walk to find that connection with the public that is going to, you know, put you in the top 10.
so one
You
other
know,
song I want to talk about is Astronomy,
yeah,
one of your songs that I don't know.
yes,
I mean, I presume that it was a pretty a big staple in the band when you guys played it.
yes,
But obviously,
oh
when
yeah,
Metallica covered it,
that changed my life. That changed my life.
tell me about that.
Um, well, that was the time I had left the band about 10 years earlier. I left the band '86, so in 1997 they were doing an album of people they had a version of Turn the Page by Bob Seger. They had bunches of songs by Thin Lizzy and Motorhead, and just a lot of their influences. And thank God we were one of their influences, and they wanted to do a Blue Oyster Cult song. And I heard on the internet, because the internet was new in '97. It was all dial up internet. You remember those days.
Oh yes.
And but I said, it'll be some, some of the obvious songs, or maybe a heavy song, or maybe one of the hits. I didn't know what it was going to be. Then I found it was going to be Astronomy. I said, holy crap, that's great. I mean, I co-wrote the song. I only had about 25% of the publishing on it. But as soon as I knew they were definitely doing it, I quit my day job. In rock star fashion, you find you're going to be on an album with one of the biggest bands in the world, and probably at that time was the biggest
Hmm.
band in the world. And and it told me that I needed to write more songs, and which, yeah, definitely write more songs. One of the first things I did after I quit my job,
What was your job at
you know
this
what I
point?
was going to do? I was working in the book publishing business,
Okay,
and that's where I did the books for Alfred Music,
right.
mostly educational books. It was part of the National Guitar Summer Workshop, which is a, a company that did workshops for kids in the summer, and they would make books for their students. So then they connected with the bigger distributor, and then they had to get serious with books. So uh, I would write some of my own books, but also I learned typesetting and page layout, and it was fun and exciting until it wasn't.
How much was music in your life at that point?
Well, never stopped. It would be like, but yeah, that was right after I got my master's degree too. So I knew some of the software that I'd be using, and it was fun. I would do all the captions for the. You'd have to put some pictures in your educational book, so I would do all the captions. What do I write about Miles Davis? Well, so I did all the captions in the books, and made some editorial choices. Doing the piano books was a lot of fun. We had three different authors in that series. Still a very big seller. Um, but it was a 50-week a year job, you know, and I wanted more time off to do music, so I and write more songs. The first guy I called up was Ian Hunter,
Hmm.
Ian from Matahupo,
Yeah, yeah.
and we had this. I was working with Neil Smith from Alice Cooper
Right.
and Dennis Dunaway from Alice Cooper. We had a little writing band, a rock band, and we'd be writing songs on Monday nights. So I said to Ian, "How would you like to come to Neil's house and help us write some songs?" He says, "Oh, yeah, sure." So I'd pick him up at his house. It was about a 40-minute drive to Neil's house. And while we're driving in the car, he's telling me all these stories about how he wrote this song and, his methods. We talk about other things too, families and, you know, life on the road. And yeah, and then he get down to Neil's house and say, "Oh, I'm just going to observe." And of course, he's such a creative guy. You can't hold him back, and he'd be listening to what we were doing. I don't know. And then he'd go out in the backyard because he had these little cigars. He was trying to quit smoking, so he figured, I guess he had these little cigars he just smoked. He couldn't smoke in the house. So he'd be listening to us practicing. We're working on a riff, and he'd run in and say, "Oh, I got something. Let's do this. And then so he helped us co-write 4 songs that came out on a recording called Bouchard, Dunaway, and Smith. And then I started doing solo albums.
Mm-hmm.
I started
And
doing
you've done
solo
quite a
albums.
few.
We had some great gigs. We played the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Neil. We went to did a little tour of England, France, but generally Neil didn't like to be on the road. We do 50 rehearsals and 5 shows. I'd rather do 5 rehearsals and 50 shows. Um, so he dropped out of the group, and then my brother came into the group, and we started this other band with Dennis Dunaway on bass called Blue Coupe, and we're going to be in Toronto
Right, in July.
coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that.
Yes. At the Elmo Combo.
The Elmo Combo
Yeah.
is a famous place, I guess.
Yes. Everybody played there.
Yeah. So we are looking forward to that in July. So, and then that opened up a thing. We've got 3 studio albums with that band, and I started doing solo albums, which were fun. And every time I do a new album, I learn something new. So, just put out the 7th solo album, and it's a beautiful autobiographical album of my life in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that, and of course other stories that I might not have as well fleshed out if it wasn't for Ian's encouragement.
Oh, really?
For Ian Hunter's encouragement. And then I think of back too as being self-produced. You're doing your own albums. I think back at some of the great producers that we had in our Blue Oyster Cult days. We started with our manager, and then we met this guy, David Lucas, who was a jingle guy in New York, but a really brilliant guy, real musical guy. He would get the harmonies right. He would get he would tell us when it wasn't, it wasn't swinging enough. Didn't have the right feel. And then later on, we worked with Tom Werman, who did a lot of Cheap Trick records, tremendous producer. And then after Tom, we had, Martin Birch, who did the Deep Purple records. Yeah. And then he did, I think, Judas Priest, or no, Iron Maiden. He did Iron Maiden for many, I don't know, 15 albums with them or something like that, And then the last one of the last producers who worked with was Bruce Fairburn, who did the Aerosmith comeback
Right.
records, and yeah. So every time I'm working on a record, I think, well, what would Martin say? Is this? Are you, have you sung this as good as you can, or have you've sung it too much? Maybe you have to back off and take an earlier take. All those sort of decisions, and just sort of the formality of doing recordings. Making recordings that resonate.
If you don't mind me asking, here's a kid who has this dream of being a rock star, and then winds up with one of the bigger U.S. rock bands, touring for many, many
Hmm.
years with big hits and a lot of album sales. At one point, you decide that you want to leave. And I can't even imagine what the road life and what kind of pressures you're under. But was it a difficult decision to decide to leave a band, which is part of the dream that you had? And then I guess,
No,
because I presume that once you've lived the dream, maybe it's not as interesting. But how difficult was that decision, or how did you come about that decision?
it was very impulsive. It was very impulsive. Um, there were like a whole stack of factors. I wouldn't say any one
Mhm.
factor was the reason I left. Probably the biggest was I had a young family at the time. Two young daughters,
Right.
and I, I, I felt like and I had been so lucky yeah, every step of the way, through high school and, going to college and then ending up in this band and getting signed with Columbia and then that whole ride. I felt so lucky that, well, it's time to try something else. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I didn't know. I felt like I couldn't really, I was so burnt out from the tours and the recordings and um, that I said, well, I'll just have to shuffle the cards and see what comes up, and I wasn't going to know what I was going to be doing until after I did it. So I got out of the band, sat around for a couple of weeks, figured, well, maybe I'll get out of music altogether. I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll just drive a taxi. Drive a taxi or uh, but I ended up starting to dream about music and says, oh, I got to do some kind of music thing. So I worked as a producer. I produced other bands for about 2 years. Had no idea how hard it was. I mean, from what I know, I was like, these guys, they 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 were just regular guys that we worked with who were very musical. I figured, well, I could do that, but I didn't understand how difficult the business side of it was going to be, and then finding the right combination of personalities. Um, so that was a 2 year experiment that was not very successful. My first unsuccessful event in my life was those 2 years. And then I ran into some people at a party. We had moved to a new town, and I met some people at a party, and they said, "Wow, what there's a private school just up the road called Foreman School, and they'll take anybody." this is this is Ron McFarlane. His son is a famous cartoonist, Seth MacFarlane. The Family Guy
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
cartoon. Yeah, Seth and Ron has that same sense of humor. So I ended up working with Ron McFarlane for 8 years in a private school, you know, private boarding school for dyslexic students. And that's when I really learned a lot, and I was very successful at that. I learned teaching chops, how to really connect with the student and get them to learn. It was they're people with learning difficulties, so it was starting out in the seat of my pants. I was 50 years old, and that was a nice run. And then I got into that, like I was saying, I got into the publishing thing for a while with the music publishing books. And then after I got tired of the music thing and I had the Metallica cover,
Hmm.
I decided that I would just be a adjunct faculty rather than full time. And that meant, traveling around to like 4 or 5 different schools and just doing a few lessons here, a few lessons there. But it was lucrative. I could raise my rates because I was a rock star.
What did you get out of teaching?
Oh, I just loved the kids. I loved learning from, I would be teaching them, but they would be teaching me, about all kinds of different music that I taught video for part of my full time career there. So I learned a little bit about, putting together videos, which I still use now,
Hmm.
uh, and, yeah, I had some very. I loved taking a group of uh, students, young students. They could be junior high school. They're 13, 12, 13, 14 years old, and you put them together, and all of a sudden something clicks, and then the next thing you know, they're playing music you couldn't believe. And that was a good. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I did that for 20 years.
Did you ever lose your passion for music? I mean, it doesn't sound like it, or if you did, it seems like you've gotten it back. But did you? Was there ever a time when you weren't as passionate about music?
No, I was always loved it. Always loved it. Um, it's a different world now, because it's all digital and we trade instead of going to a studio. We trade files, and I kind of like that. I can be a part of somebody else's record, like that Pink Floyd
Hmm.
thing. I can't believe that. I can't believe I'm on that Pink Floyd with Al Di Meola and Billy Cobham.
Obviously, the pandemic
Yeah,
did not affect you in your creativity and the things
no,
that you did.
no, yeah, yeah, and yeah, I put out my sixth solo album at the beginning of the pandemic, so I was doing a lot of interviews. I did 100 interviews
Wow.
on that record so far. Now the new album called American Rocker. uh, I'm only done about 45 interviews. So, but I think during the pandemic it was interesting because everybody just wanted to talk and like finally connect with somebody. You know,
Yeah.
maybe now it's not. Oh, it's not a big thing. I can go out to shows now. I can buy my groceries without having to disinfect them.
As Stephen Colbert said, that time when we were scared of our groceries.
Yes, yes. Oh my God. That was the only one trip that I could take every week was just to go to the grocery store. So I put it was great because I didn't have any gigs to go to and uh, not no distractions. So the writing for this latest album, I think, was really the best writing I've ever done. It's the most me in a recording that I've ever done. And it was just being reflective as to what really gives me joy. And it was those years when you were just working your way up the ladder, in the music business and being very, very lucky that it happened. That it happened. It could have gone different ways at any time. It could have just fallen apart. I'll say, I hate you. I don't want to do this anymore. But no, but 16 years later, it was still chugging along.
At the height of it, was it everything you thought it would be?
Oh, yeah, I think it was. I mean, we knew we were never going to be a phenomenon like the Beatles. Uh, but just to be able to, be in, part of that realm. I have met some famous people Roger Waters, who I told the first thing I said to Roger Waters was, "I have learned so much from your bass playing." I don't think he knows that I played on this Pink Floyd
Right.
tribute thing, but he was a big influence, and Mick Jagger, he was really nice when I met him. It was just a chance encounter on a Caribbean island, but that was real rock star life. And he remembers coming to see Blue Oyster Cult, and he was asking me about, well, do you remember that? And I said, I can't believe he remembered it. This was in 1975, and I met him in 2008.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's those. Got to meet a few people that are my idols.
Ever think about writing a book?
Yes.
Well, because your bandmate in
Um,
Blue Coupe, Dennis
well,
Dunaway, wrote a book.
yes, Dennis wrote a very nice book, and we actually toured his book, did a lot of bookstores, and that was an interesting ride too. I've always been looking. When I was a rock star, you didn't really learn anything except getting on stage and playing the shows and doing the best. Expressing your best personality to the audience.
Right.
But as far as like learning anything, no, it was pretty. I felt like, but so when I left, I felt like, well, let's just explore the world, and see what happens. So I worked with Spencer Davis as his keyboard player. That was tremendous, and then I got to do these big charity shows with different, all-star shows. I went to Iraq and played for the American troops in Iraq, and that was a tremendous experience. Um, and stuff that I would never do, or go on a tour with Dennis Dunaway, and he's he's giving lectures about his book. Like, wow, that's very good. That's very
Well,
good.
when I look at your
Yeah.
touring schedule, I don't see solo shows. I see the Blue Coupe and I see the Bouchard brothers. Is there any plans for
Well,
your own stuff?
yeah, I will probably do a solo tours.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm practicing, rehearsing every day. The Bouchard brothers is my brother Albert and my partner Joan, who is actually started out as an acoustic player and took lessons with Dave Van Ronk
Oh,
in the
wow.
Village for many years. And yeah, so I had to teach her. This is my teaching skills. I had to teach her how to play electric guitar, and so she plays a lot of the leads in our show. Where Albert and I just concentrate on being the rhythm section, like we were.
Right.
Making it feel good and everything, and she puts the icing on the cake. So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's very interesting. I think we'll probably end up doing Bouchard Brothers show until Albert has something else. He's all working in 5 different bands and he got different projects. He's doing a science fiction project. He just turned 75, and he is working on his 3rd double vinyl album in a row.
Wow.
He put out Imaginos, Reimaginos, and then there was Imaginos 2, and now he's working on Imaginos 3, and they're big projects. And I'm stunned because he's just a well of creativity, and I'm sure that spurs me to, when I'm doing my records, I better make this good because I don't want to look bad compared to that my older brother who's just cranking them out.
Was there always competition between the two?
Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But as we've talked about recently, is like he was always my biggest supporter in the band. He would find things in my tapes that I didn't think were that great, and he'd bring them up to the band and says, "We got to do this," And Albert doesn't take no for an answer.
Well, it must be interesting
So he's,
when the two of you, obviously family, and you've been together all your life, but when you think about the amount of years you've played together and continue to play with one another, There must be
Yeah.
a language or a thing that happens on stage that's probably unlike many others.
Yeah, and even when we were like in the middle of the pandemic, we did a whole video series where he would send me music and we'd make the music and then we'd send videos back and forth and we put them all together like we were in the same room. It was yeah, and even now when he asks me to do something for one of his albums or he does a guest spot on my album, it's like I don't really have to worry about will will this stylistically fit in. You know, we've had this sort of psychic radar between siblings. You know, psychic radar that. Once in a while I'll say, "Oh, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Do something else." And then, but most of the time it just fits in perfectly. I don't, it's just our background. It goes way back.
I can imagine. Joe, thank you so much for
Yeah.
taking this time. It's a real thrill talking
Well,
to you.
it's great talking to you. You did your homework really well, and I'm looking forward to seeing this. Hey, if you can come to the Elmo Combo, let us
Yeah, I
know.
will try. Definitely.
Yeah. Drop me an email or whatever.
Okay.
Get a hold of me, and
So I think,
I don't know what the situation is, but I'm looking forward to a good time.
yeah, it's middle of July. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very much. And
Yeah.
I look forward to
Well,
seeing you.
Thank you so much. It's great talking to you.